There is a strange, heavy kind of silence that lives right before everything you know collapses. It's the quiet I lived in for months, the slow, warm hush of a life that felt safe, the small, ordinary noises of a home waiting for a baby. I remember how peaceful it felt, like being wrapped in cotton. I remember the sudden, bright joy that filled me when the test turned positive, the way Mark laughed and kissed my belly, how we whispered names and plans like secret promises. I thought the silence meant everything was right. I thought it meant forever. Imagine building a future with someone until the future feels real. You pick out names and debate nicknames. You argue playfully about paint colors for a tiny room. You Google cribs at midnight and talk about what kind of parent you'll be. That was me. I'm Sarah. I believed we were a team. I believed every small, ordinary kindness meant he loved me the way I loved him. I painted the nursery soft yellow and hummed to my unborn child, picturing soccer games, first days of school, birthday candles. I held his hand and believed in us. But what if everything you build is resting on a lie? What if the foundation, the promises, the late night laughter, the plans whispered over takeout is an artful illusion, a stage set for someone else's fantasy? The thought didn't exist in my head at first. Betrayal felt like a distant headline, not something that could reach into the soft, private corners of my life and tear them open. Mark was everything I thought a husband should be, charming in that casual, effortless way, successful with a tidy career and a polite laugh, the kind of man who noticed the small things and made you feel chosen. Or at least that's what I thought. He had a way of looking at me that convinced me I was the center of his little universe. That look is the cruelest part now, because it was practiced and it was real, but only for a while. The cracks were ridiculous at first, the kind you always excuse. A text that disappeared into his pockets for hours, a business dinner that stretched longer than expected, the faint ghost of a perfume clinging to his collar that didn't belong to me. I rationalized every one of them. He's stressed, I told myself. He's working for us. He's tired from long hours. Love invents reasons to soothe the uneasy things, but truth is stubborn. It has a way of sliding under excuses until the light finds it. When it finally forced its way out, it didn't arrive with thunder and a messy confrontation. It arrived as a still, sickening clarity, the kind that sits in your chest and makes your breaths shallow and strategic. The world narrows to soundless, glaring detail. I was 8 months along. My body was full of life and exhaustion, my ankles swollen and my emotions frayed like old rope. I was at the peak of vulnerability. That's the hour he chose to betray the one person who trusted him most. I found the proof not in a shouting match, but in a small, private way. A message, a photograph, a name that would not leave my mouth. In that instant, the woman who laughed at his jokes, who smoothed his tie, who planned their life, she evaporated. I could feel her peel away like wallpaper. He thought he'd hidden it well. He thought pregnancy made me soft, dependent, unable to fight back. He believed I would fold under the weight of the betrayal, that I'd accept it because of the child, because of the life we had made. He misjudged me. He grossly underestimated the thing that had been growing inside me all along, a quiet, coiled resolve. When I handed him the divorce papers, he did something I'll never forget. He laughed. A short, incredulous laugh, like I'd made a bad joke, like women don't actually do the things they say when pushed. He believed I was bluffing, that the pregnant wife would stay because that's what society expected, because that's what the world had taught him to assume. He had no idea what I had been building in the months his back was turned. He had no idea that the silence he'd taken for weakness was actually the sound of a plan forming. He had no clue that when I signed those papers, I wasn't ending a chapter in panic. I was rewriting the whole story. He He thought he'd win by waiting. He was wrong. So wrong. Let's rewind for a moment. Before the betrayal, before the lies, before the silence that smothered everything, there was light. There was laughter. There was us. The before picture still lives somewhere in my mind, framed like a memory I can't quite throw away. Back then, Mark and I were the definition of perfect. We met in college. He was the handsome, driven finance guy who wore ambition like a second skin. And I was the wide-eyed graphic design student who believed passion could fix anything. He was confident, composed, and when he smiled, it felt like the world shifted just a little. Our story began with cliches, spilled coffee in a crowded hallway, nervous laughter, an offer to make it up to me with dinner. I remember thinking how rare it was for someone like him to notice someone like me. He was polished. I was chaos. He spoke about the future in numbers and investments. I spoke in colors and daydreams. Somehow we fit. It was a whirlwind. Weekend road trips, rain-soaked kisses, late-night phone calls that stretched into dawn. He remembered every anniversary, every tiny detail, even the way I liked my tea. He'd show up outside my dorm with flowers, or send me random texts like, "Just thinking about your smile." I used to show my friends and blush like a teenager. When we got married, it felt inevitable. Two people meant to build something beautiful. Our apartment was small, but it was ours. The walls were filled with laughter, the kind that only happens when you still believe love can fix anything. He'd dance with me in the kitchen, bare feet on cold tiles, the smell of pasta sauce filling the air. He'd whisper, "You're my everything, Sarah," and I'd believe him completely, blindly. Beautifully. When I found out I was pregnant, I thought that was the happiest day of our lives. He lifted me off the ground and spun me around until we were both laughing and crying. We picked out baby names over dinner, arguing playfully about whether it would be a boy or a girl. We painted the nursery soft yellow because he said it was a happy color. He'd rest his head against my growing belly, talking to our daughter in this soft, silly voice, promising her the world. I thought we were the picture of love, the kind of couple people envy. But that's when the slow fade began. At first, it was easy to miss. A few late nights at the office here and there. A few too many urgent meetings. The man who once couldn't stop texting me during work hours suddenly became impossible to reach. The dinners grew quieter. His eyes, once so full of warmth, started to look elsewhere. I told myself it was stress. After all, becoming a father is a big deal, right? He said his boss was giving him more responsibility, that he was doing it all for us, for the baby. I wanted to believe him. I needed to. So I did, but then the signs started piling up. His phone, once always face up on the table, became glued to his pocket. He changed the passcode. His work dinners ran late into the night. He smelled faintly of a floral perfume that wasn't mine, expensive, sharp, and unfamiliar. When I asked, he smiled and said, "You're imagining things, babe. You know how paranoid pregnancy hormones can make you?" And I laughed it off, because love makes you do that. Laugh when your heart is quietly cracking. I felt so alone in that house. A giant, emotional, hormonal ship drifting through a sea of doubt. I'd sit in the nursery, stroking the tiny baby clothes we'd bought, wondering why he never came home in time to help me assemble the crib. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, listening for the sound of his car in the driveway. Most nights, it never came. I started to wonder if I was the problem. Was I not attractive anymore? Was I too needy? Too emotional? My best friend, Chloe, became my anchor. We'd known each other since high school. She was bold, confident, the kind of woman who always had a solution for everything. I'd call her crying, and she'd show up with ice cream and that calm, steady voice. "You're overthinking, Sarah," she'd tell me. "He's just under pressure." Big promotion, new baby. It's a lot. Don't let your mind play tricks on you. She'd stroke my hair, make me laugh, and promise me everything would be fine. And for a while, I believed her too. But sometimes, the people who comfort you the most are the ones you should have questioned from the start. The final red flag came on our anniversary, our 5th one. I spent the whole day preparing. I wanted to remind him of us the way we used to be. I cooked his favorite meal, roasted salmon with lemon butter, and set the table with candles. I even squeezed into a dress that barely fit my swollen belly. I wanted to feel beautiful again, wanted us to feel alive again. As the clock ticked closer to dinner, I texted him, "Can't wait to see you." "Dinner's ready." No reply. An hour later, a message popped up, "Swamped at work. So sorry. I'll make it up to you this weekend." My heart dropped, but I forced a smile. I told myself not to cry. Hormones, remember? I sat alone at the table, watching the candles burn down, the food going cold. The silence of that room was deafening, but deep inside, something stirred, an unease I couldn't ignore this time. A whisper in my gut telling me that something was very, very wrong. After I cleaned up, I noticed our shared tablet on the counter. We used it for grocery lists, baby items, and syncing schedules. I hadn't touched it in weeks. I don't even know why I picked it up. Maybe curiosity, maybe desperation. But as the screen lit up, a notification popped up on the corner. A reservation confirmation. From a restaurant I'd never heard of. A fancy one. Candlelight, wine, 2-person table. Booked under the name Mark. For that very night. My hands went cold. I clicked it open. The time matched exactly when he texted me about being swamped at work. My heart didn't just sink, it plummeted. I remember staring at the screen, unable to move, unable to breathe. My mind raced through excuses, but there were none left. Who was he with? How long had it been going on? The baby kicked just then, a sharp, unexpected reminder that I wasn't alone in this. Tears blurred my vision as I ran my hand over my stomach. That was the moment the illusion cracked completely. Every memory, every smile, every "I love you" suddenly felt poisoned. And deep in that silence, the kind that comes before everything falls apart, I knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning of the truth. The reservation was a single loose thread. Nothing more than a little white rectangle of confirmation on a bright screen, but when I tugged at it, the whole tapestry of our life began to come apart in my hands. I didn't know I had become a detective. I only knew I had to know. The questions multiplied like shadows. Where had he been? Who had he been with? How long had the lie been living under our roof? I started small. Habitual things first, the receipts, the calendar entries, the odd gaps in his story. I listened differently, learned to read the silences between his words. I watched the way he fumbled with explanations. Every inconsistency was a breadcrumb. Panic made methodical. Fear made me clever. I'm not a tech genius. I can barely manage my own email, but desperation teaches you fast. There was an old laptop in the study, the one he'd stopped using after he got that shiny new work-issued machine. It gathered dust, the screen dimmed with neglect. He left it unlocked sometimes, careless in ways that now felt like a slap. One night, when the house hummed and the baby slept, I carried that old laptop to the nursery and sat under the soft glow of the nightlight, as if the tiny lamp could somehow protect me from whatever I would find. Guessed his password on the first try, his childhood dog's name. He had told me stories about that dog, laughed about it in the early days of our relationship. He called it the only honest thing in my early life. It was sentimental, a little ridiculous, and it was exactly the sort of thing he'd use and then forget. He was sentimental. He was careless. That combination cost him everything. And there she was, Luna, the names slashed across message threads like a brand. It felt absurd to me, like a character from a book, until the messages themselves smacked me awake. Short, private notes that bled intimacy. Miss you when I'm at work. Last night was perfect. Can't wait to see you again. Then the sentences that finished me. This is real. Not like what I have at home. I read them sitting in the nursery, surrounded by tiny folded clothes and the painted letters on the wall that spelled out a future. I'd been collecting in my head what I have at home. Those words lodged in my throat like gravel. I had always imagined his home as our sanctuary, a place where we were equals, partners, where love was mutual and palpable. To find myself reduced in his mind to an adjective, what he has at home, felt like a kind of erasure. I wasn't his partner in those messages. I was background noise, a convenience. The idea that the family we were building could be viewed as an arrangement, a duty, a checkbox on a list, that was the true betrayal. Not the kisses, not the late nights, but the way he had written me out of the narrative of his life. Then came the dates. Dates that matched up like a cruel calendar, proof that the moments he'd missed were not accidents but choices. The night he missed my first ultrasound, the night I lay on a table waiting to hear the quiet, miraculous squiggle that would confirm our baby, he had been somewhere else, somewhere with her. The weekend he told me he was off on a team-building retreat with colleagues. The one I scolded him gently for taking away from our nursery prep was actually a cabin by a lake where their photos showed them wrapped in blankets, sipping wine by a fire. The picture of him in a candid, laughing pose, arm around her shoulders, felt like a photograph of a life that I'd been excluded from all along. The betrayal was not abstract. It pressed into my chest with a weight that left me breathless. I tried to breathe through it. I tried to name it. Tears came in waves until there were none left. The body responds to deep hurt like a body in shock. My muscles were empty, my eyes raw. I would wake up sobbing without memory of where the scream had come from. I screamed into pillows so the neighbors would not hear the sound of my heart breaking. I walked through the rooms of our home like a stranger in my own life, cataloging what had been stolen, trust, faith, the simplicity of shared plans. Grief was a physical thing. It had texture. It tasted metallic and cold. It left me hollowed out. For a while, that hollow felt like surrender. I thought foolishly, pathetically, that collapse was the only honest response. I had imagined confronting him, collapsing in evidence, letting all the ugliness spill out in a single purging scream. But the more I read, the clearer it became that confrontation would only invite his practiced charm, his rehearsed apologies. He could lie under pressure. He'd done it before. I needed something steadier than a scene of heartbreak in our living room. I needed a plan. I needed to become something else, and then something inside me shifted. That grief, so raw and jagged, began to temper into something different. It was not healing, not at first. It was colder, more deliberate. It was a pulse under my ribs that steadied my hands. Rage arrived as a focused, terrible clarity. It was a tool sharpened by hurt. It did not feel like the desperate, flailing fury of someone whose world had caved in. It felt surgical. It felt precise. Have you ever felt sorrow so big it changes shape? That was my moment. The sadness did not vanish. It sat with me like a patient companion, but something else sat beside it. A resolve that would not allow me to be a victim on display. Rage can be ugly, they say, but it can also be the fire that melts weakness into something harder. Resolve. I felt that hardening begin in the quiet hours while the house breathed around me and the baby slept against my chest. I felt tenderness and ferocity braided together in a way I'd never known I could be. I closed the laptop, not with a slam, but with the calm of someone who had seen enough to know what to do next. I wiped my face slowly, surprised at the steadiness of my hands. The baby kicked, an odd, life-affirming reminder that I was not alone in my plans. I pressed my palm to my stomach and made a vow, not whispered in hysteria, but declared with a cold, steady voice in my head. He would pay for this? Not with violence, not with petty cruelty, but with the one thing men like him understood best: consequence. I would not let him take my future. I would not let him take my daughters. I imagined a quiet, patient strategy. Evidence gathered like arrows. Lawyers positioned like shields. Dignity preserved like armor. He would never see it coming because he had always underestimated the woman he thought he could keep quiet. He had mistaken my silence for weakness, my pregnancy for vulnerability. He had no idea that in the hush of those months I had been building something else. A plan, a promise, a reckoning. That night, I folded the laptop closed and walked to the window. The city lights blinked on, indifferent and bright, as if nothing had happened at all. But everything had happened. The life I had imagined was over, but in its place something new, sharper and truer, was beginning to take shape. I breathed in, held the world steady for a moment, and then let the breath go. The hunt was beginning. I became an actress in my own life. Every day I put on the costume, easy smile, soft laugh, the kind of distracted affection that looked like contentment. I answered his questions with casualness, never probing. I stopped asking why he was late. I stopped looking sad in public. I learned to tuck the hurt into the smallest folds of my movements so it wouldn't show. When friends asked how I was coping, I said, fine, tired, but fine. I gave him all the space. He wanted and watched him fill it with someone else, and he took that space like a man taking advantage of kindness. He grew bolder, more careless. He came home later, his cologne different, floral and unfamiliar, leaving that soft, foreign trace on his shirt like proof of an absent story. When I hugged him, I caught the scent and folded it into my memory, pretending it was nothing. I asked about his long day and listened to tales of spreadsheets and meetings, while my heart worked like a small animal in my chest. I practiced being ordinary while I gathered what he thought he'd hidden in secret. I began building something else. I found a lawyer, not the kindly, conciliatory type I'd imagined when naive futures slipped through my fingers, but a shark with reputation and teeth. Her name was Eleanor Gray. She had a reputation for dismantling men who thought status could save them. I met her in a downtown office with glass walls and a view that felt too sharp. I slid the laptop across the desk and watched her eyes scan the threads I pulled together. She didn't gasp, didn't judge. She didn't tell me to calm down or to think of the baby. She just folded her hands, smiled with the kind of cold professionalism that's practiced at a boardroom table, and said, "Leave everything to me." That smile steadied me. It felt like armor. Eleanor taught me how to collect quietly: bank statements, email headers, timestamps, receipts for hotels and dinners. She showed me the small legal weapons that could strip a man of what he thought was untouchable. I learned how to ask questions without alerting him, how to set traps that looked like kindness. I practiced patience. The plan was patient, like cold water setting in concrete. I would not be hurried. He would have no idea what was coming. The final piece of the puzzle dropped in the least cinematic way, a tiny ping from a photo backup app we shared. The kind of thing couples have for convenience. It was a Tuesday. I was meeting Chloe for coffee, claiming the usual pregnancy stress as a reason to escape the apartment. I wanted to breathe, to vent, to be held. I wanted to believe my best friend would give me that. When my phone buzzed, I almost ignored it. The cafe hummed with other people's lives. Sunlight glinted on the table. I wiped my hands on my jeans and checked the screen. A new album had uploaded to our shared cloud. Its title made my throat close, My Luna. I knew then that my life had slipped into a different register of betrayal. I clicked, fingers trembling, and the pictures opened, dozens of images. Intimacy captured like evidence. Mark and Luna laughing in a dim restaurant, leaning into each other on a balcony as the city glittered behind them, holding hands in ways I had only imagined we would hold hands. There were photos on a weekend trip, her hair loose in the wind, his arm unmistakably possessive around her waist. There were selfies of them kissing, lips touching in angles I had never seen on his face toward me. Each image was a small lethal revelation, a catalog of moments where I had been absent by design. The camera didn't lie. The evidence was crystalline dot. Then I looked closer and the world tilted. Luna wasn't a stranger. The face that smiled up at Mark from across my phone screen was the face I had trusted for years. It was Chloe Dot, my best friend. The woman who came over with ice cream when my back ached, who held my hair back when morning sickness took me by surprise, who sat on my couch at midnight and stroked my hand when I worried aloud about names and finances, the one I described my loneliness to, the one I'd leaned on when he was distant. She'd been the person I unloaded my fears to, the confidant I expected would rage for me, for us. Instead, she had been the other woman. The double betrayal spread through me like poison. It was worse than anything I'd imagined because it was layered, not just the lie of an unfaithful husband, but the calculated, intimate treachery of a friend who had known my vulnerabilities and used them as an open door. It felt obscene and ridiculous at once. Like a cheap novel I couldn't stop reading because the plot had leapt off the page and into my life. Sitting in that cafe, the sounds around me blurred into nothing. The steam from my untouched coffee curled into the air like a question mark. Chloe walked in then, coffee in hand, faced the picture of sympathy, the same face I'd seen in the photographs, the same practiced tilt of the head. She smiled, reached for me, and everything I'd built in my quiet, careful months threatened to collapse into a single raw reaction. But the game had changed. Where before I'd plotted to dismantle a marriage built on lies, now there was a second player in the arena. My revenge could not be simple anymore. The plan I'd rehearsed, legal, surgical, unromantic, felt too small for the scale of the betrayal. This was not a single infidelity to be exposed and punished. It was a betrayal that had been nurtured and witnessed and camouflaged by the very person I confided in. I watched Chloe sit across from me, watched her hands fold around her mug, watched the sympathetic smile that had been measured and rehearsed. I felt a cold, animal clarity settle over me. I could have shouted then, stood up and hurled the phone at her, begged for explanations, for apologies that meant nothing. I could have shown the world the photos in a fury that would have satisfied a momentary kind of justice. But fury is loud and short-lived. I had learned how he answered loud and messy confrontations, with charm and plausible remorse, with 1,000 little lies that sounded like truth when wrapped in tears. Instead, I let Chloe talk. I let her ask about my swelling ankles and my sleep. I let her touch my hand as if she were comforting me. All the while, I felt the teeth of the plan Eleanor and I had sharpened sink in deeper. The stakes had changed, but the method did not. There would be consequences, precise and unavoidable. There would be a reckoning, not just for him, but for the friend who had betrayed me emotion. When she left, the way she hugged me felt like a lie. The city outside the cafe went on, indifferent. People walked past the window with their own small dramas that didn't include me. I slid the phone into my bag and felt the weight of it like something heavy and cold. The betrayal had become personal in a way that bled into every corner of my life. It wasn't just a divorce anymore. It was an unmasking of two people who had conspired to erase me from the narrative of my own future. Walking home through streets I once loved, I cataloged the next moves in quiet detail. Eleanor would need this, that, and the other piece. I would gather what I had left to gather. There would be documents to request, witnesses to be carefully handled, reputations to be exposed at the right surgical moment. But beneath all the logistical planning, something else grew, a strange, steady satisfaction that came from knowing I was no longer the person they expected. I had become something else, alert, patient, and immovably resolute. The betrayal had been a brutal teacher. It had stripped away illusions and given me, in their place, a clarity of purpose. Chloe and Mark had made a choice that would define them. I had made mine. The game had changed entirely. Yes, and so would the ending. This stopped being about a messy divorce. The moment I realized ordinary endings wouldn't cut it. This was about annihilation, not in the violent, cinematic way, but in the precise, immovable way you erase someone's comfortable life and leave them to watch the pieces you've taken away. I didn't want the petty satisfaction of yelling in a courtroom. I wanted systematic, clinical justice. I wanted him to wake up and realize that everything he'd assumed was untouchable had been handed away, and that he had no one to blame but himself. Eleanor Gray was the kind of lawyer people whisper about. Her name had an edge to it, the sort that made bankers tighten their collars. When I first sat in her glass-walled office and slid the laptop across her desk, she didn't gasp or tell me to think of the baby. She read, made notes, and then, the thing that sealed her in my corner, she smiled a small, professional smile and said, "We will take everything you're owed." That was the language I needed. It was not sentimental. It was efficient. It was lethal. We built a three-pronged plan: financial, social, emotional. Each part was a tool. Each tool was designed to strike at what Mark valued most. He loved money like some people love religion. He loved reputation like some people love oxygen. He loved being the hero of his own story. We would take all three away. Financial first. Mark had always been careful to show the world a tidy portfolio, the right cars, the right suits, the right philanthropy on glossy brochures. But like so many men who think their moral ledger is as immaculate as their bank statements, he had hidden small, ugly things, secret accounts where he stashed bonuses and expenses, gifts to a name that would mean nothing to anyone but him, transactions that smelled of dinners in hotels. Eleanor taught me how to find the paper trail without tripping alarms. We sent subpoenas under quiet cover. We requested records from banks and credit cards with a detachment that felt almost surgical. I learned to read ledgers like poetry. Each line item told a story, dates that matched nights he was away, gifts that matched photos he'd taken with his other woman. We cataloged everything: hotel receipts, transfer memos, even an engraved bracelet receipt with the same handwriting as the Luna photos dot. Our goal wasn't simply to take money. It was to claim what he'd lied about. We would fight for full assets, for alimony that would force him to feel the consequences every month, and for child support that would ensure our daughter would never be collateral in his selfishness. The courtroom, when it came, would be a place where the truth had weight, irrefutable numbers and carefully cross-referenced dates. He had built his identity on a financial pedestal. We planned to topple it stone by stone. The social campaign was subtler, surgical in its own way. Mark's pride was his reputation, the responsible family man, the dependable face at charity luncheons, the one wives recommended for tutoring their children. Reputation is a brittle thing. A whisper is enough to crack it. I began reconnecting with the wives of his colleagues as if by chance. Casual lunches, neighborhood book clubs, small coincidences arranged with a deft hand. I planted seeds the way gardeners plant bulbs, quietly, in places that would bloom at the right season. Not lies, only questions. Have you noticed he's always eager to volunteer but rarely home? Isn't it odd he's suddenly so protective of his phone? Women share information. Gossip spreads like wildfire in tightly knit communities. We use that, not to lie, but to let truth take on a narrative of its own, threaded through polite conversation and raised eyebrows. Once a reputation begins to wobble, the cracks show under public light. That's when opportunities for professional consequences appear, lost promotions, withdrawn endorsements, awkward silences at events he once dominated. But the emotional strike, that was the masterstroke. Numbers and rumors can ruin a man's life, but nothing unsettles him like the sudden, visceral realization of what he has lost. I wanted him to feel the exact gutting absence I had felt, not as a flash of anger, but as a slow, irretrievable loss. For that, I needed to be strategic and patient. I gave birth to Lily in the smallest, most ordinary way you can imagine, with a list of familiar names, labor breathing slow and relentless, and an unexpected surge of love that rearranged everything inside me. Holding her for the first time was like waking into a room lit for the first time, definition and warmth. She was the most profound thing I'd ever made, and suddenly the fight was not about me anymore. It was about making sure she'd have security and dignity because of the choices I made now. Motherhood sharpened the plan into a moral imperative. I was no longer exacting revenge for myself. I was building a future for a child who deserved better than the mess he'd been dealt. When the time came, I sent him a picture. One, perfectly ordinary. Lily asleep, fists curled, a daisy onesie peeking out from under the blanket. Nothing dramatic, nothing meant to provoke a scene. It was a simple, precise move, a hook baited with sentimentality. I knew him too well. He would see the photo, feel the tug of fatherhood, and move. Possessiveness is a predictable thing. It shows up in men like him as control. I wanted him to feel that pull, to have his hand extended toward something he believed he still owned. The stage was set. Everyone had a role to play. Eleanor was ready, documents primed like surgical tools. The social currents were arranged to nudge reputations into exposure. The emotional bait, Lily's photo, hung in place like a slowly burning fuse. All that was left was time and patience. It felt like waiting for a storm to reach the shore, inevitable and unstoppable. Was I becoming ruthless? Maybe, but ask any woman who has been cheapened by betrayal and she will tell you. Ruthlessness can look a lot like self-preservation. What would you do if the bedrock of your life were dug out from under you by the people you trusted most? What would you do when the person you sheltered gave your future away for fleeting pleasures? These weren't rhetorical questions for me anymore. They were the engine of my resolve in those final days before the trap was sprung. I lived two lives, the smiling new mother coaxing sleepy eyes from a newborn, and the quiet strategist running through scenarios in my head. At night, while Lily slept, I read over bank statements and rehearsed conversations. By day, I smiled and accepted flowers and greeted neighbors with a calm that was practiced but real. It was important he never suspected the depth of the plan. Men like Mark thrive on the assumption of weakness. And then, as if on cue, he walked into my carefully built web. He thought the picture would bring him home. He thought time had softened my edges. He thought a few words, a few promises, and perhaps a public display of contrition would be enough to reclaim the life he had ruined. He did not know that every step he took was being recorded, every promise cataloged, every gift matched to a receipt. He did not know that when he reached out, he was reaching into a room already, full of witnesses and proof. He walked into the trap, not with the swagger of a man returning to a waiting wife, but with the lightweight confidence of someone who believed himself untouchable. He had no idea the world he liked to display, clean, moral, exemplary, was about to be systematically dismantled. Piece by piece, the text started like a drip soft at first, then insistent, a steady tapping on the glass of a life I'd already sealed. I miss you. I made the biggest mistake of my life. Let's be a family. Each message was a small practice plea, the kind of words he'd used to lull me before. I read them on my phone while Lily slept in her car seat, and I felt something that was not pity and not forgiveness. I felt a cold curiosity. He had come back on cue, predictable as ever. I played my part exactly as planned, hesitant, guarded, a woman who'd been hurt, but still had a soft spot for the idea of family. I let him think he was making progress. I let him sweat. He began to do what he always did when he wanted to buy back time and affection. He brought flowers cheap, ostentatious bouquets he'd never buy without a camera-ready reason, apologies shaped into boxes and trinkets. Promises articulated in phrases he'd rehearsed in his head 100 times. "I'm done with her," he told me. "It was a mistake. I want my family back." He thought his rehearsed remorse could patch over months of deceit. He didn't know I already knew the truth. He didn't know I'd seen every text, every photo, every hidden transaction. He didn't know the other woman's name, Chloe, because in his arrogance he'd never imagined his secret would be traced back to the one person who sat on my couch and wiped my tears. He never imagined that the friend he'd used as a confidant while betraying me would be the same person whose face I'd found in my phone and on my shared photo stream. When I agreed to meet him, I chose the place carefully. Neutral ground, a public park with wide, open spaces and well-trafficked paths, no closed rooms where he could charm a sympathetic witness into believing him. He expected intimacy at a cafe, dramatics in a restaurant, the private space where he could engineer a scene. He got a bench by a duck pond and the midday traffic of running strollers and dog walkers. There's power in audience. There's power in place. I wanted witnesses, even if they were strangers. He was there on time, and he looked the part of a contrite husband, handsome in the way he always used to be, hair combed just so, suit deliberately casual. He approached with that practiced expression of shame and longing. He had his lines ready. "Sarah, I'm so sorry," he began, voice low and earnest, the cadence of a man who'd learned how to sound broken enough to be believed. It was a moment of weakness. "It's you I love. It's always been you." He poured out his apology the way he always poured the same syrupy sentiment into our life, quickly, smoothly, hoping it would cover the bitterness underneath. He talked about mistakes and regret, about how nothing felt right without us together, about how he'd ended it with the other woman. He used the words that used to make me weak in the knees. I let him talk. Let him spin the little fantasies he thought could stitch us back together. I let him replay memory after memory, as if nostalgia might replace the evidence. I listened with the patience of someone who had rehearsed silence for months. I measured his breath, the way his hand trembled slightly when he tried to look earnest. I cataloged his tells. Men like him were skilled at performance. They relied on sympathy to mask guilt. I gave him the sympathy of a woman who had nothing left to offer. That I smiled odd, it wasn't a smile that reached my eyes. It wasn't the warm, forgiving smile he'd seen for years. This was the slow, deliberate smile of a predator who knows the prey is already trapped. He faltered under it as if the air had changed. The rehearsed lines did not find their mark. That was my cue. Eleanor stepped out from behind a stand of sycamores as if she'd been summoned by the sky itself. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone who'd been waiting for this moment, sharp heels on gravel, briefcase in hand, the sort of professional presence that made people look twice. A process server followed, an unremarkable man with a folder and a legal stamp, part of the choreography that had been rehearsed. In a dozen quiet offices and over countless late-night calls, Mark's face was a study in confusion at first. Then horror dawned. Confusion, then the kind of slow, sick realization that a man has when he recognizes a trap he didn't know existed. He tried, of course, to make a joke, a nervous laugh to cover the tremor in his voice. "Sarah, what is this?" He stammered, but he knew. I handed him the stack of papers as if offering a menu. Thick, official, immovable. Divorce papers, custody forms, the legal instruments of unmaking. "You've been served, Mark," I said, the words simple and even. I laid everything out, the dossier of evidence we'd built like an altar to truth, printed messages with timestamps, photographs labeled and dated, bank statements with transfers matched to nights he'd lied about, receipts for hotels and dinners, the letters we'd obtained linking expenditures to moments he'd promised to us. Eleanor watched him with an expression that never flinched. She'd done this before. She knew the choreography of male disbelief. He gripped the papers as if they might dissolve like a bad dream. His hands trembled. The paper rustled with the sound of a life being reconfigured. "This isn't," he started, but the words fell away. There is a certain finality in the weight of a legal document that rhetoric cannot touch. It is heavy in your hands and impossible to argue away in the street. "If you fight me on this," I said, my voice running cold like a blade, "I will send every single piece of this file to your clients, to your boss, to your parents. I will make sure everyone who believes in your spotless life knows the truth. You will lose everything." Each word was practiced, precise. Every threat backed by an immutable pile of evidence. Eleanor's presence was the iron at the back of those words. It wasn't blackmail. It was truth with teeth, the color drained from his face. The confident man who had once dominated meeting rooms and family gatherings stood there, diminished, his professional armor melting under the sun. He was pale, lips parted, the steward of his own universe suddenly unmoored. The paper in his hand trembled like a heartbeat. People on the path slowed, glanced our way, then resumed their strolls. A dog tugged its owner toward a squirrel and managed, in its canine obliviousness, to underline the absurdity of the moment, a public unraveling with the ordinary life of others continuing around it. Mark's mother, I later learned, would hear about that very bench in that very moment, and it would be like reading about a meteor strike, unbelievable, then irrevocable. But even in that shock, I felt a small, cold satisfaction. This was the moment the plan had been built for, clarity delivered in a place he couldn't charm away. He could no longer pretend ignorance. He could no longer invoke confusion as armor. He had been handed the mirror he refused to look into at home. And yet the final twist remained. The dossier was heavy, but it was not the end of the story. There were other players, other documents, other audiences we had yet to address. He clutched the papers, his jaw working, the same arrogance that had shielded him for months, suddenly small and ridiculous. He had been dethroned in the smallest, most public way possible. He stood there, a man with no stage left to perform on Dot as the process server completed his task, and Eleanor closed her briefcase with a soft click. The world resumed its pedestrian flow. Mark stumbled through apologies that were now useless. He begged in the way of men who only know how to beg when all their other options have been stripped away. He looked at me with a desperation that was almost comic, given how long he'd been indifferent. Dot only later would more fall into place. For now, the papers were real, the threat was real, and his world had tilted. The bench, the duck pond, the indifferent trees, they were witnesses to the exact moment a man realized he had miscalculated the woman he'd thought to underestimate. He hadn't seen everything yet. He hadn't seen the reach of the evidence, the social currents we'd started to turn, the people prepared to witness and corroborate. He hadn't seen the way truth travels when it's packaged and dispatched with surgical intent. The final twist, the one that would make sure his name carried the weight of consequence beyond paper, was still being set into motion. For him, the fall had begun. For me, the rest of the work was just beginning. He didn't fight it. Not a single word in court, not a grand defense, not even the usual bluster I'd come to expect. His liar had looked over the files, the evidence, the ironclad precision of what Eleanor and I had built, and advised him to settle quietly. And he did. Just like that, the man who once believed he could talk his way out of anything, who thought charm was a shield, signed his empire away with a trembling hand. The house was mine. The car, the accounts that once held my name in small print now bore only mine. A massive alimony and child support package was granted, enough to ensure Lily and I would never have to depend on anyone again. When the judge's gavel came down, it felt like a door closing, not in loss, but in liberation. The fallout was swift and merciless. Word travels fast in polished offices and whispered circles. His indiscretion, as they so delicately called it, became lunchtime entertainment. The golden boy of the company, the man everyone admired for his family values, became the cautionary tale they laughed about behind closed doors. Clients pulled back. Colleagues avoided his calls. His name, once spoken with respect, was now followed by an eye roll or a smirk. And Chloe. Poor, deluded Chloe, the woman who played best friend while rehearsing betrayal. Her mask cracked, and the social circle she'd wormed her way into vanished overnight. The same people who once adored her, who had dinner at our house, who took photos with her at baby showers, now crossed the street to avoid her. She was the punchline to every whispered scandal. I heard she tried to defend herself, spinning tales of love and soulmates, but no one believed her. The woman who thought she'd won ended up utterly alone. Eventually, she packed up and moved to another city, disgraced, forgotten, exactly where she belonged. I sold the house soon after. Every corner of it was haunted, not by ghosts, but by memories. The nursery where I'd once wept, the kitchen where I pretended everything was fine, the bed that had held both love and lies. I refused to let my daughter grow up in those shadows. I sold it all, and with the money, I bought a sun-filled apartment overlooking the city. It was smaller, cozier, but it was ours. The air felt different there, lighter, freer. I painted the walls soft yellow again, not as a memory of the past, but as a promise for the future. With Eleanor's help, I invested wisely. I started my own graphic design business, something I'd always dreamed about but never dared to do. Clients came in slowly at first, then steadily. I poured my energy into it, fueled by the quiet, steady confidence that comes from surviving hell and building yourself back from ashes. Every project completed, every satisfied client, every invoice paid was another step toward reclaiming who I was, not the version of me who needed anyone's validation, but the woman who had built her own peace. About a year later, I heard through a mutual acquaintance that Mark and Chloe had tried to make a relationship out of the ruins they'd created. For a while, they played at being a couple, maybe trying to prove to the world that what they'd done had been worth it. But betrayal doesn't make a foundation. It makes quicksand. It didn't last long. They fell apart, predictably, under the same deceit they'd used to build it. Lies have a way of eating their creators alive. He reached out once through a hesitant email. "I've changed," he wrote. "I'd like to see Lily. I miss you both." The words were familiar, the same softness he used to weaponize when he wanted something. My response was short, clean, final. The court set the visitation schedule. "We will follow it. Do not contact me again." I didn't need to say more. The boundaries were ironclad now. He could have his allotted hours, but he would never again have access to my peace, my time, or my heart. One evening, as I watched Lily laughing in her playpen, her tiny hands clapping at a song only she could hear, I realized what I was feeling wasn't triumph. It wasn't revenge anymore. It was peace. Pure, steady peace. The kind that doesn't need applause or validation. The storm was over. The lies, the heartbreak, the betrayal, all of it was behind me now. I had walked through fire, and I hadn't just survived. I had emerged unrecognizable, stronger, wiser, whole dot, and as the sun poured through the window, painting Lily's curls gold, I whispered softly to myself, we made it. So, what's the moral of this story? Is it that revenge is sweet? In a way, yes. But it's so much more than that. See, revenge isn't always about watching someone fall apart. It's about watching yourself rise. It's not about fire and fury. It's about rebirth. What I learned is that the most powerful revenge isn't destroying the person who hurt you. It's rebuilding yourself so completely that their actions no longer have power over you. For a long time, I thought strength meant forgiveness or pretending I wasn't hurt. But real strength, real power, came when I decided I didn't need closure, apologies, or explanations. I only needed me. I turned my pain into purpose, my anger into energy, and my heartbreak into a blueprint for something better. I was never the same woman after the betrayal. And thank God for that. The naive, trusting woman who believed that love could fix everything, she's gone. In her place stands a warrior, a mother, a survivor, someone who no longer measures her worth by someone else's affection, someone who understands that walking away isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Mark didn't just lose a wife. He lost a future with an incredible daughter, a bright, giggling little girl who looks at the world with wonder. He lost the chance to come home to warmth, laughter, and unconditional love. He lost a woman who once would have moved mountains for him, stood by him through storms, and believed every promise he made. He lost me, and that was his real punishment. Because my love, my loyalty, was the most real thing he ever had. You know, betrayal does something to you. It breaks you open, painfully, brutally, and you think you'll never be the same. But maybe that's the point. Maybe you're not supposed to be. Have you ever had to find a strength you didn't know existed? To wake up after a night of tears and still go to work, still care for your child, still move forward? That's what rebuilding looks like. Quiet, steady courage. Betrayal leaves scars, deep ones. But scars aren't ugly. They're proof that healing happened. They tell a story of pain survived, of lessons learned, of strength earned the hard way. Every time I catch my reflection and see that glimmer of resilience in my eyes, I know that scar is my crown dot to anyone listening right now. Anyone who feels broken, who's been betrayed, who's staring at the ruins of a love that once felt uncheckable, please hear me. Your pain is real. Your anger is valid. You have every right to feel it. But don't let it consume you. Let it construct you. Let it shape you into someone wiser, fiercer, untouchable dot, because the truth is, the greatest payback you can ever give the people who wronged you isn't screaming or scheming. It's living. It's smiling again when they thought you never would. It's thriving in the very life they tried to destroy. It's becoming so full of joy, peace, and power that your very existence becomes a reminder of what they foolishly threw away. I became that reminder. Every day I wake up in my own apartment, surrounded by light and laughter. I am that reminder. Every time Lily's tiny hand wraps around my finger, I am that reminder. Every project I finish, every smile that isn't forced, every night I sleep without tears, that's my victory. We are living proof that from betrayal can come beauty, from destruction can come creation. So no, the story isn't about revenge. It's about resurrection, about finding strength in the ashes and realizing you were always the fire. If you felt the sting of betrayal in this story, if you rooted for justice or found a piece of your own story in mine, then you are one of us. Subscribe to Payback Stories and hit that notification bell, because sometimes the best stories aren't about falling in love. They're about rising from the ashes after love has burned you to the ground. Until next time, stay strong, Stay smart. And remember, peace is the sweetest revenge of all.